Welcome back, everyone. We are up for our next presentation, Being Woman Enough in Esport, Authenticity, Gatekeeping, and Trans Inclusion in Competitive Gaming. Take it away.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Burcu. I'm a postdoc researcher at Aarhus University, working on esports and gender. In this presentation, I draw on my study Being Women Enough in Esports, esport to examine how womanhood is defined in competitive gaming and how these definitions particularly constrain to trans women players. So in short, I will discuss what it means to be considered woman enough in esports and how these norms produces forms of exclusion and gatekeeping. Here is the outline for today's talk. So the objective of this, I'm sorry, okay. The aim of this study is to conceptualize gender verification regimes in e-sport as forms of bureaucratic performativity and to demonstrate how mechanisms designed for inclusivity and fairness may paradoxically reproduce exclusion and surveillance. So this slide shows the evaluation of sex verification testing in the history of sports in 1960s. Women athletes were subjected to invasive physical examinations, which later shifted to chromosome testing and today to testosterone-based eligibility policies. Although these practices are framed as ensuring fair competition, they have in fact created a powerful regime of surveillance that seriously infringes upon athletes' privacy and rights. In 2023, World Athletics introduced a new regulation banning transgender athletes who have undergone male puberty from competing in the women's category. So this policy not only regulates the current hormone levels, but also places an athlete's biographical history under scrutiny. Further tightening the boundaries between the biological and social dimensions of gender. So these practices have institutionalized the idea that being a woman must be documented through a passport or chromosome testing or hormone levels or medical certification. So in doing so, gender is framed as a fixed and measurable reality, while a form of surveillance that introduces upon women athletes privacy, subjectivity, and self-identification become normalized. The concept of gender-based identity verification in e-sport is a new extension of this historical trajectory, especially since the 2020s, with the rise of women-only trans and non-binary tournaments. Some organizers have introduced requirements for participants to verify that they are women, trans, or non-binary. Institutions such as Aniki, ESL Gaming, Blizzard Entertainment, or Riot Games have developed systems that require players to prove their belonging to a specific gender category. So these verification processes typically involve documents such as ID cards, medical certificates, social media history, or voice interviews, and are formalized through an eligibility certificate. Thus, gender-based identity verification in e-sports represents a kind of new form of regulation. One conducted not through biological testing as in traditional sports, but through digital documents and data infrastructures. This table is the one I created on gender verification mechanism in contemporary e-sport organizations. This is something I compiled myself using publicly accessible gaming platforms and institutional sources. Of course, these details may change over time, but what is striking is that the table continues to be updated every single year. And e-sport performance relies on digital skills rather than muscle strength or other biophysical differences, therefore justifying the distinction between women's and men's categories through metrics of physical power is conceptually unfounded in the context of e-sport. So I argue that these institutional verification practices are shaped by cultural norms that define who is recognized as a real woman or a real man, which makes it critically important to examine the cultural dimension of these exclusionary effects. Before moving into the findings, I just want to briefly introduce the two key concepts guiding this study, doing gender and authenticity. Gender is not a fixed attribute that individuals possess, but a process that is continuously enacted and validated through social interactions. In everyday life, people perform femininity or masculinity through gestures, vocal tones, clothing, and behavior. So this process operates through a mechanism of an accountability, meaning that everyone is assessed according to whether they act in line with gender norms. Since trans identities do not fit neatly into the binary gender system, trans individuals occupy a culturally precarious position within this order. So as a result, they are frequently perceived as an inappropriate or suspicious in social interactions. Here, trans identity becomes not merely a self-definition, but a possibility that tests the boundaries of the cultural order. And consequently, the social acceptance of trans individuals often depends on their ability to perform the correct form of femininity or masculinity. And e-sport environments are also spaces where gender is not simply possessed but continuously performed. And players express femininity or masculinity through their voices on voice chat, communication styles, avatar choices, gameplay behavior, and team interaction dynamics. So these performances are constantly monitored by community and functioning as an accountability mechanism similar to what West and Zimmerman describe. And in this context, trans players occupy a culturally precarious position because their gender expressions do not always align with the binary cues that gaming community expects. So as a result, they may be perceived as inauthentic, suspicious, or deceptive during intersections, especially in voice communication and competitive setting. And in authenticity, Julia Serano's concept of authenticity test refers to the formal and informal gatekeeping practices that compel trans individuals to prove the validity of their identity. So these practices generate systematic distrusts towards self-identification and place the burden of the proof on the trans subject. Identity is continuously tested through criteria such as appearing sufficiently feminine or masculine, or obtaining medical or psychological certification, or presenting documents for verification. So in this way, the first-person authority of the trans subject is undermined, while conformity of normative narratives and expectation is rewarded, and non-conformity is met with suspicion or exclusion. Gender and identity verification procedures in e-sport functions as the institutional extension of this cultural surveillance. So rather than relying on self-identification, these systems prioritize bodily or technical markers to administratively define the boundaries of who counts as a real man or woman. So in doing so, cultural norms are reproduced and reinforced through both interactional and institutional mechanisms. But esports gender verification system function as institutionalized authenticity tests that force trans players to prove their identities through documents, appearances, or technical criteria rather than self-identification. And yeah, these are the cases in this study. In this study, the 4 cases presented here have been taken into consideration. Although, unfortunately, the number of incidents involving visible trans and non-binary players are limited, and each case vividly reveals how mechanism of exclusion, eligibility, suspicion, and digital surveillance operate. The first case is Maria Remelia Kreveling case. So Kreveling was one of the first women to appear on the professional League of Legends stage, and she quickly became a target of both sexist and transphobic attacks. In 2015, she joined the Renegades team in League of Championships series, but despite her high-level performance, her identity, body, and womanhood were relentlessly scrutinized by viewers. Platforms like Twitch, Reddit, and Twitter were flooded with comments questioning her genders, focusing her voice, shoulders, makeup, and facial features as supposed indicators of whether she was a real woman. So the table you see on the screen serves as an example for social media posts. So the process aligned with Julia Serrano's concept of authenticity tests, where gender is evaluated not through self-identification, but through externally imposed norms. It also reflects West Zimmerman's notion of gender policing, as digital communities attempt to discipline and invalidate Remelia's identity. Her womanhood was not accepted on her own terms, but was subjected to collective judgment. These intense pressure and online harassment led Remelia to withdraw from SES. So her case remains one of the most striking examples of gender-based exclusion and digital surveillance in esports. The second case is from 2022. Valorant game changers matched the EQ's Rise team attempt to enter a cis male player into a tournament designed exclusively for women and marginalized genders by falsely registered him as non-binary, and the player was also caught using cheat software during the match. And Riot Games issued long-term bans to both the player and the team manager. So this incident shows that inclusive tournament formats can be vulnerable to certain forms of abuse. But more importantly, the case like this risk increasing the pressure on trans and non-binary players to repeatedly prove their identities. In other words, although those who exploit the system are typically men, the burden of identity verification often ends up falling disproportionately on marginalized gender groups. Galaxy. This is my third case. In 2023, the women only her Galaxy Apex Legends tournament sparked major debate again about the gender identity and inclusion esports. Trans woman player Nikki Catalyst was disqualified because her government ID listed her as male, which led to a widespread backlash from players and viewers who saw the decision as discriminatory. Within 24 hours, organizers reversed their ruling and reinstated her team, promising to revise their policies to better protect trans participants. But this incident highlights how fragile gender-based eligibility rules can be. Instead of supporting marginalized genders and strict reliance on official documents can exclude the very players these tournaments aim to include. So it also reflects a broader pattern in esports, where trans women are pressured to constantly prove their womanhood, facing scrutiny and bureaucratic barriers that cis women do not. Let me check the time. Okay, and this is the final case. In 2025, ESL Impact League Season 7 again reignite the debates about the gender identity and fairness when Supernova comments a team composed of openly trans women advanced to the finals. When triggered, the controversy was not the team's performance, but the reactions of some viewers and gaming community members who questioned whether trans women should be allowed to compete in a women's league, and the backlash that quickly circulated on social media subjected trans women to scrutiny simply for being presented in the competition, and shifting the discussion away from competitive fairness and toward a broader social dispute over who is entitled to belong within the category of women. And these reactions revealed that women's e-sport spaces often become sites where doing gender is closely monitored and players are expected to perform culturally dominant versions of womanhood. So this moment also triggered that what Serano terms authenticity test. This pressures demanding that trans women prove the truth of their gender through documents, medical evidence, or bodily criteria that are never required of cis women. And although ESL's inclusive self-identification policy challenge such assumptions, public responses demonstrated that gender verification in e-sport operates less as a tool for ensuring fairness and more as a mechanism of social gatekeeping. So as a result, leagues designed to provide safer competitive environments for women can end up producing intensified surveillance and scrutiny and exclusion for trans women players. So as a final word, this study has shown that gender-based identity verification in e-sport is not a neutral technical tool, but a form of bureaucratic performativity that helps produce, test, and police who counts as a real woman. So across the 4 cases, I saw how verification systems often reinscribe cis-normative assumptions and place the burden of proof on trans and non-binary players. So the key question then is not whether verification should exist, but how it can be redesigned, from gatekeeping to trust building, from rigid documentation to right-based, inclusive frameworks that protect privacy and dignity while genuinely broadening access to competitive play. Thank you. Yeah, I have still 3 more minutes. Thank you for your time and attention.
Yes, excellent timing. I don't see questions for you in the chat right now, but we'll give people a chance to add those while I ask a question. Thank you so much for presenting your research. How do you think trends in esports like sportification or the increased application of sports frameworks to esports, or things like ongoing conversations about esports and the Olympics contribute to the kinds of trends you're seeing?
It's so hard to answer this question because first of all, we should solve this trust problem, and no one is going to feel safe, even in social media platforms trigger these opponent things. So now you know that in Olympics trans people might be banned completely. So I don't think that esports and Olympic sports can support each other. It's a kind of an expectation, like I wish it could help to each other, and I wish we could find a way to develop these people into like trans people or non-binary people to be a part of it in an equally. But I don't think that e-sport can help, or Olympic Games help this to change it. I don't think that, but it was a very nice wish, hope, but no.
And do you
Any
have
question?
any, yeah, do you have any suggestions for event organizers on how they could make their events more inclusive while also stopping some of the perhaps bad actors that you talked about in your cases?
Trans and non-binary participants, you mean?
Yes, toxic participants or participants who are faking their identity in order to take part in inclusive tournaments under um, uh, without being part of that group in the first place.
I don't think that it is like this is a kind of thing that we should to understand from society base. The problem is in society actually. So the system cannot change if we cannot change the mindset. That's why I believe that education system, everything has to start from the education system rather than the cooperations or corporations or the firms actually. So we should first of all try to change the mindset of the youth people, the young people, and then when they start to act differently, the system will change automatically. But I don't think that any institution or organization or a firm based or a company can change this rapidly and instantly. It will take so long time, and it has to be persistent. Like in every country at the same time, in every organization, in every education institution, should take this seriously and really work on this. In my point of view, otherwise, it's not something that can be changed with. A good wellness of the like the corporates or institutions.
Excellent. I don't see more questions, but we do have a few
Yeah.
minutes left. Are there any final
Okay.
things that you want to mention that you didn't get a chance to cover?
Um, I guess no, but thank you for this opportunity. It's so nice to meet you and to be in here. And thank you for everyone who's participating in this conference. I guess there are 26 people now listening to us. I guess one of them is two of us in the list, so 24 other people. Thank you for all of them. And yeah, that's all. It's nice to
Yeah,
be in
thanks
here
so
with
much for
you.
sharing your research with us.
Bye.
All right,
I'm
everybody, we're going
leaving. It's
to switch to our break slide, and then we will have our next speakers up at 12:30 Eastern. We look forward to seeing you there.